So then, we are back with more understandings from the time of the Second Tabernacle services are refined in the Aramaic English translation of the word. This translation comes from the original manuscripts of the prophets of the Tzayelic lineage. So then we can understand the time of the end as per Yeshayahu the prophet. We find in a layer of understanding of the 61st chapter, where then we understand the spring feast, autumn feast, and also the returning of the cities of the Messiah laid waste for many centuries. So then, since most of the countries were then given, unfortunately, the wrong scripture, they were then given the Greco and the Roman translation, and they were not truly taught properly. We find ourselves then after 2009 per than the regular calendar. It is a Gregorian calendar. But then rather, studying from the original manuscripts, we find in the original calendar, where the year then obviously is 7013. So then, after 7009 or 2009, then the time of the seat, a time of then the lack of the holy cities then was ended. Because of the ending of the time of the seat, then we find ourselves studying these holy documents from the original manuscripts of the Tzayelic lineage. So then we find the 61st chapter known as Isaiah, but doesn't exist. The name is Yeshayahu, because must have the name of the creator mixed with the name of the person. That's why then Yeshayahu, Yirmiyahu, or then Mitchiyahu, these names, they have the initials of the holy name of the creator himself. So then, it does not mean the Creator is going to take over the governments of the world, but He does provide at least the flow of events, so then the nations can adjust themselves for the coming of the new trade of the end. How can we then describe the situation? Obviously then, when we read the holy instructions, we must understand who Ishmael was, the first son of Ibrahim. The first son of Ibrahim, he was a king. He was a king because when then Ibrahim fought then with the kings of the time when he left Egypt, he then received lots of spoils from the war. And then afterwards Melchizedek had showed up to him, and then Ibrahim gave 10% of his spoils, indicating then the Messiah later would say then regarding then Melchizedek being the first non-Hebrew priest and king, precisely then what the Messiah would be, but then a true king, a true priest, and from the lineage of Yitzhak. So then, we find ourselves then studying these holy documents, because during this time where then the deceit has ended, then the holy cities are initiating. We find then the holy prophet Yeshayahu chapter 1:8 explaining then the coming of the first holy city on the land of Cush, precisely then modern Sudan. We find then obviously then not only explaining of tabernacling and the times and the seasons being restored, but then we find a warning from these holy prophets. So then, obviously, then there is a section of these specific prophecy where then Yeshayahu the prophet mentioned, woe to the land beyond the rivers of Ethiopia, the land of the fierce or the violent ones. So then let's understand why then the prophet mentioned woe to the land beyond the rivers of Ethiopia. Obviously during this time, not only the great prophet was explaining then the understanding of the time of the restoration period, where then the holy cities would become again available, and on the land of Cush is the initiation of the time of the restoration regarding tabernacling. Then Yeshayahu the prophet also mentioned the compact understanding also of the Gentiles during the same period. When we read Yeshayahu, it is extremely compact, because must combine tabernacling from the teachings of Moshe must combine tabernacling and its laws, must combine the prophets, must combine then obviously the Gentile level during his time, the Gentile level of the future, and also the restoration period of both situations, tabernacling and Gentiles. Later, when Daniel came around, he was then absolutely 100% dedicated only, mostly for the Gentiles, except those few verses where then tabernacling was made evident. More we can learn from Daniel the 12th chapter, when Daniel received from the angel himself understandings of tabernacling. However, in order for us then grasp these holy instructions, we must then get rid of the Greco-Roman scripture. It is a choice each person must make. So then, when we read the holy instructions, we must read it from the original manuscripts. So then, tabernacling becomes the reference point. So then, the holy layers can be then placed properly. Let's understand the reasons why we must not trust the scripture from the Greco and the Romans. These facts are not religious. They are simple facts. In any case, if you go to the police, they want to know facts of a crime, facts of stealing, facts, not religion. Let's evaluate then facts. How did then, for instance, understandably, tabernacling was the center of the whole understanding of the holy instructions, obviously. Let's evaluate Cornelius. Cornelius then is found in Acts. Cornelius was a centurion from the army of Rome. He said he had a vision from heaven while he was praying on the top of the house. Hebrews, they were very acquainted with the praying on the top of the house. So then Cornelius, he wanted to become part of the time of the dispensation period. He wanted it very badly. But then Cornelius, what he did simply was, he had time in his hands because he was a centurion. And then he was in charge of 100 men. He had time then to get his own money and buy then, for instance, clothing, provisions, and he would give to those who were unfortunate. After these, he would mix himself with the Hebrew brothers for prayer. Then, when the translation of the holy documents came around, then the Greco and the Romans, trying to make themselves important, the Romans then decided to lie. Cornelius never had a vision. So then, when the prophet Joel was then saying and prophesying, at the end of times your old man would have dreams and visions, speaks of the younger people having visions and dreams. What is the distinction of a vision and dream? Did truly then Cornelius had a vision? No, he did not even have as much as a dream. What is the distinction from dreams and visions? Visions are only given when the holy city is secluded. It's a direct link with heaven. Then, dreams are given to those who are outside of the holy cities and must be interpreted. For instance, Joseph, he interpreted the dreams. So then, those who are outside of the holy cities, such as then Miriam, the mother of the Messiah, and Joseph, the stepfather of the Messiah. Miriam, she had dreams. She did not have visions. She was not living in a holy city secluded. She had a dream. So then, we find ourselves then making a distinction. Why then she had a dream and not a vision? Because she was resting at night. At night, while she was resting, then she had a dream. The Greco and the Romans, when they translated, they did not understand the distinction. But we know. So because they were Romans and they tried to be very important, then they simply lied. They twisted around. In order to make Rome important, then they placed his name as a centurion and then part of the army. Then he was then involved with some sort of a vision. But the truth of it is this. While the Hebrews, they were praying, prior of this event, he had given them provisions, shoes, clothing to those who were unfortunate. Afterwards, he went to pray with the Hebrews. Then, if you read then Acts, you find then a word from heaven came through the people first, through the Hebrews, and then a word was spoken concerning the Gentile Cornelius. And he was indicated whatsoever he had done thus far, it was known, it was recognized, and a word came from heaven on his behalf, and he should visit with Shimon, and he was in Joppa. But then, because he was a Roman centurion, when the translators of the Romans translated the holy documents, they wanted to make him more important than the Hebrews. But they did not understand that we can't have a vision outside of the holy cities. Must be only dreams, it must be interpreted. So then, bluntly, the Romans, they lied. Another problem is this. Regarding then the wife of Lot, the column of salt. How then did the wife of Lot come out of the cities of the plain, or the city of the plain at the time she left the city? How then she became a column of salt? Where it comes from? What was the custom of the Romans when they were being paid with salt rations? The Romans, they used to be paid with salt rations. So in northern Africa, for instance, when they would go around then deducting taxes from the people, they received then salt as part of the payment. That's what you get then as far as understanding then the Greco and the Roman translation. It is twisted. So then, what went on then with the wife of Lot? She simply came out of the city and she returned. Then she was then burned with the rest of them. A study was made of the cities of the plain. They used to use pitch as mortar to make their roads and their construction. Imagine then when sulfur comes down hot and burning from heaven, what causes when it hits then the pitch? It burns. Then many years later, centuries and centuries later, when the atomic bomb was released then in Japan in August of 45, then the technicians, after the blast, they went around and tried to find out what went on. What did they find? They found sometimes, and they found piles of salt. They didn't know at first what those piles of white powder were. Then they studied and found those were the salt minerals of the burnt bodies of the people. So then the wife of Lot, she simply went back to the city, and then a memorial of salt was then given. Has nothing to do with the column of salt. Column of salt was then used because the Romans used to get paid with salt rations. So the Romans, they lied. But we are cleaning it up. So then, the reason why then we should not read anymore the Greco and the Roman scripture, it's because of these. And there is another reason very important. It's because obviously then the layers of understanding of the holy instructions must be properly set up so then people can understand. The Messiah said not a layer of the holy instructions is going to be left undone. So then, during this time of the restoration period, we find ourselves then studying precisely those areas where then the trade of the end must be given back to the Ishmaelites, as it was during the time of Ishmael. Ishmael had no government of himself. He only had caravans. Caravans then in the modern times is freight. So what's going on then in the world? There is a restoration period of the holy cities plus of the Gentile level regarding trade, where then the monetary system must be decentralized. So then the dragon receives then direct trade with him, later given to the Ishmaelites. And it must be because the Ishmaelites, they have the most crude, petroleum, oil. Without oil, no ships can deliver the cargo. So then, Ezekiel the 37th chapter, then we understand the stick of authority of the Ishmaelites and also of the Israelites via crude. So then, because of this time, then what is the most important for us to understand as far as the layer related with the Gentiles? Obviously then, must have steps of formation for the initiation of this trade of the end as per the Torah. The Holy Torah never lies. In fact, the Torah is a liar find or liar finder. So then, speaking of the time of the restoration period, then we understand what it meant when then the Messiah himself mentioned at the end would be then areas of then Gentiles and areas of Hebrews. However, because of this factor then, during the time of Yirmiyahu the prophet, chapter 1:8, then he explains the first holy city on the land of Cush, modern Sudan. However, he woed the land beyond the rivers of Ethiopia. Where is then this place? This place is DRC or Congo, where the Mr. Kabila is the president. What we understand from these is Yirmiyahu the prophet many centuries ago mentioned, woe to the land, because it's going to be an event taking place. And this event is described then in Daniel the 11th chapter, because those must be layered. Yirmiyahu is extremely compact, however then later it was not divided but defined. So DRC, as we understand, is the richest place of raw materials and minerals in this world. That's why it was in the midst of Africa, and is in the midst of Africa, beyond the rivers of Ethiopia. What do we understand of trade when speaking of Daniel the prophet? He was not only a prophet, but he was a tradesperson. We must understand dual understanding. He was speaking on behalf of tabernacling, and most of his life he was a tradesperson speaking of the Gentile level. So then, what can we understand as far as trade? We understand trade as then the decentralization of the monetary system first, then via computerized trade, as Daniel mentioned then, and knowledge would increase. Knowledge would increase for the purposes of more trade. So then, the dragon obviously he is already from China and already in Dubai. When China, or the dragon came out of China, already had the okay from the Ishmaelites, because the first dragon mart outside of China was Dubai, the most relevant store of the region. From then on came to Cancun. So the dragon is securing for himself geographical areas and making them distribution centers for the other nations to rebuild themselves. If you are smart, then you understand you must have a Dragon Mart also in Australia, becoming then the South Pacific trading post or distribution center. Then in South Atlantic, South Brazil. Then in North America and Canada, for instance, the northwest route is opening because of the temperature of the globe is increasing, making easier for ships to go through. Then in India, because part of the BRICS, and then South Africa. With these, only we find many distribution centers, and then nations, they get busy because they have to rebuild. What the Creator wants to show them is what He's going to do with this earth in the future. So then when we read Ezekiel, then we understand the stick of authority of the Ishmaelites and the stick of authority of the Israelites, then known as tabernacling. So then, prior of the giving of the stick of authority of the Ishmaelites, what then the dragon must have to make sure that the nations are rebuilding themselves? He has to have raw materials. He does very easily for them to receive those metals already smeltered in form of bars, so then China can obviously improve their air quality, making it easier for them to produce. Mr. Xi, then obviously he is in charge of the new system, and he has a great friend, Soviet Union, responsible for the security of the world. Then Africa has tabernacling and the most important deposits of raw materials for the new technology known as coltan. So then Congo has 80% of the deposits. Brazil has 20%. What can we understand the importance of these known as then production, and understanding what the dragon is going to do as being then the factory of the world, making those products inexpensive so nations can rebuild? It is precisely raw materials. What is the importance of raw materials making China then the factory of this world? So every country, the prime objective is finding more raw materials in form of minerals. For instance, speaking of Brazil, very important, that we have then 20% of the coltan deposits, plus Amazon is extremely rich with raw materials. So it doesn't take much for a person to understand in order for the dragon then to have his own system as per the instructions, very clearly defined. So then the world can receive products inexpensive so they can rebuild themselves. What would be the prime objective of Brazil? Finding a new president with capability of raw materials gathering, smeltering, and then sending these materials already pre-done, and ready for then China to only smelter them further and then producing. So then the world can rebuild itself. As Amazon holds a great deal of raw materials, then it's very obvious then the governor, for instance, of Amazon should become the new president. Because of this fact, certain areas of understanding are very plainly. Why do we understand then Congo being the land being woed? Because precisely from a tradesperson's viewpoint and the tradeship standpoint, we find then Congo or DRC then the land being woed. Why being woed? Because they have lots of riches in form of minerals. Must be given exclusively for the usage of the dragon, China. So then, reading then the 11th chapter, we find ourselves then in a conquest of more information regarding then why comes down then the Soviet Union and subdue Africa. They are friends regarding the BRICS, are they not? They are joined up. But the problem with DRC at the moment, there are lots of countries stealing for very cheap their raw materials. These nations are going to be kicked out of there real fast. Thus we understand the reason why the land is going to be woed. Means war, fight. And the UN soldiers are already dying. And much more will to die. Because they are the land of the fierce. The word fierce in Hebrew is taking place at this very moment as those people from other nations are dying under the leadership of the fierce ones. And the situation is going to get so bad that then the Soviet Union must come down and crush and then organize the mines for the benefit of the dragon, so then China can produce and maintain a level of productivity, so then the rest of the world can obviously rebuild themselves. That's the objective. So what would be the best then for the nations involved with the BRICS? Obviously coming up with the plans of giving raw materials pre-done for China. This truly is the objective. No nation in this world will be able to compete with China. No person or country can compete with the dragon. Dragon simply means precision. It's not a bad term. Can Brazil fight with the dragon? Absolutely not. Because the Creator, He wants the nations then to rebuild. For such, later then, the stick of authority of Ezekiel 37th chapter is given then to the Ishmaelites. And they will control the flow of products in the world via then the crude, petroleum. So then, obviously, the governor of Amazon would be a great candidate for presidency. A sustainable way of then extracting those minerals from the Amazon without damaging the environment, yet being productive. Because we must understand the Creator is the owner of the planet, and the Creator has a plan. Some people say, oh, because it's a very important area. It is true. But what is the objective? The Creator has an agenda and must be then completed. In a sustainable way then, those riches, they can be extracted and substituted with dirt and then replant the areas with more vegetation, obviously. So then, as we understand, if we are truly smart people, then in South Brazil should have obviously a Dragon Mart, a distribution center for the Chinese, then taking care of the South Pacific. As we understand, not only this, but then in Panama next year, the new canal must be opened. Then the categories of ships must change from post-Panamax then to another name. So when those big ships, those giant ships, they come from China, then for the distribution centers, then they return with the raw materials already smeltered. So the production of China becomes a whole lot easier and they can improve the air quality. This truly is the objective. The rest of it is a very fine balance of what a nation can produce. Those items, very important, obviously related with logistics. If you understand, then it is very important understanding then the freighters of the earth, because these will to play a great deal when the Messiah himself spoke of the freighters of the earth. He knew that the authority was given then to the freighters much later. However, the authority was given because the Ishmaelites were under the control, and they are controlled in the crude. The authority given to the freighters is only given because the Ishmaelites are providing with crude. But truly then the authority is with the Ishmaelites, obviously, because then the stick of authority was given them. But in order to make this trade worldwide, then obviously the freighters must have the forward motion regarding trade, but they are provided with petroleum. So then, the question is, what our dear Brazil then is going to be presenting at the G20 in September? At the moment, we find no evidence of any kind of objective. Search the internet, try to find lots of information regarding the G20. It's starting then in 41 days, and there is no objective. What the President is going to say in the midst of those very important players of the time of the end related with the trade and then the new decentralized trade system. There are no objectives that are absolutely plain understanding. There are some vague explanations of some sort of a peace in the earth and, amongst the nations, but what can Brazil do then to make the system furthering its objectives? And it was explained, raw materials. So then let's understand this further. Not only this, but then the distribution center. What do you think, Mr. Chi, would be the greatest pleasure for him of hearing? Dragon Mart in Brazil, obviously. And then when the ships, they come around, then bring the products, so then people can rebuild, returns with the pre-smeltered or smeltered materials. This is the objective. And since we understand the best place at the moment is in Paraná, Brazil, because of the vast port available and the cheaper land that it can be converted over into then an understanding of the distribution center, then it wouldn't take much for us to understand the importance of sending the raw materials from the north then towards the south, so then when the ships, they come from China for the distribution, then they return to China with the raw materials already smeltered. Please stay tuned, much more coming up.